Kendall and Cooper Talk Mysteries. I'm Julie Cooper, a thriller writer and half of the duo bringing you this regular podcast series, spotlighting mystery, suspense, and thriller fiction. First, thanks once more to my brother Chris Squires for our theme song, The Man in the Panama Hat. Our theme for this episode is originality. Originality is another key attribute of all successful writers. Hard to define, but you know it when you see it. I'm thinking of the quote from author Michael Ende, who wrote The Never-Ending Story. He said, "If you stop to think about it, you'll have to admit that all stories in the world consist essentially of 26 letters. The letters are always the same, only the arrangement varies. From letters, words are formed. From words, sentences. From sentences, chapters. And from chapters, stories." It's amazing how that works, isn't it? First, I'm pleased to introduce our special guest, Gigi Pandian. She's written several truly unique mystery series, which started with the Jaya Jones Treasure Hunt series, and then branched out into the Accidental Alchemist series, featuring a centuries-old protagonist, Zoe Faust. Zoe is the accidental alchemist who travels from Portland, Oregon to Paris, France. One reviewer called Gigi's series more fun than an episode of Portlandia, and the publisher's weekly reviewer says it's a light-hearted supernatural mystery. I say it's just what I needed right now during a time of constant political turmoil. Our guest is a USA Today best-selling author, an almost vegan, and a breast cancer survivor. We also want to offer special congratulations to Gigi for recently winning the Agatha Award for Best Short Story. She's now written, I believe, 5 books in the Jaya Jones series and 3 in the Zoe Faust series, including several that have been shortlisted for the Macavity and Agatha Awards. She's also received the Left Coast Crime Lefty and Rose Awards. Gigi is a well-traveled soul because she spent much of her childhood traveling the world with her cultural anthropologist parents, something that provides richness, character, and depth to her settings. We know you'll enjoy getting to know Gigi because she brings mystery, magic, and history to her writing. Welcome, Gigi Pandian. It's so nice to have you join us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to chat this morning. This is so exciting for me. Last week, I was at Malice Domestic, the traditional mystery convention, so it was so fun chatting with mystery about people, and now I feel like I come home and get to continue the conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm going to launch right into my questions, Gigi. And I've got to say, you have one of the most original sidekicks found anywhere in mystery fiction, who's featured as a key character in the Accidental Alchemist series. Where did Dorian, the 3-foot-tall gargoyle chef, come from? And I know from talking with you, meeting you previously, that you're very health conscious. So I'm not going to surmise that you were under the influence when you developed this character, but did he just pop into your head the way he is?
Ah, yes, Dorian, the living gargoyle who was once stone, carved for Notre Dame in Paris before accidentally being brought to life through alchemy. So I actually was under the influence of chemotherapy drugs at the time. But so the influence of that was, so it wasn't the actual influence that those were making me quite tired and not feel very well, but it was more the psychological impact of those, that while I wrote the first draft of The Accidental Alchemist, while I was undergoing chemotherapy treatments for breast cancer, and that was really, I was just writing whatever I wanted to. I was just thinking about surviving and writing for myself. And gargoyles have been something that I've been fascinated by since I was a small child, traveling with my parents when I was really little, and I had this camera and I would just go around taking pictures of mysterious things, and gargoyles always fascinated me. So I have some very bad photographs of gargoyles taken on a print film camera from when I was a small child. So when I was just writing for myself while going through cancer treatments, I wanted to just have some fun and imagine what it would be like if a gargoyle came to life.
Wonderful. Well, that shows what gives him so much originality and so much vitality, even though he was previously stone. I'm really enjoying the recipes in your books, and it's great to know that it's all clean, healthy food, something that your protagonist, Zoe Faust, also enjoys in your books. And the descriptions of food, the meals, and the dining adds so much to the warmth of your characters. Um, I know a little bit about your past history, but was it important to share a healthy lifestyle with your readers? Was that one of your goals when you ended up editing these books?
So I am an accidental chef. This was something that came to me very recently while I was working on writing the first book in the series. I was also learning how to cook from scratch. My cancer diagnosis, because of my particular cancer markers, did leave me with several food restrictions, but I wasn't about to give up eating wonderfully. I love food. And so I wanted to keep being able to eat wonderfully. And so I started experimenting in the kitchen and taking cooking classes and learning from local chefs. And so it was very much part of the evolution of creating this book. It was at the same time that I was learning how to cook from scratch. And in terms of the alchemy in the book, cooking to me had lots of parallels with alchemy. And so it felt like a very natural thing to be weaving in all of these cooking transformations and things that I was working on myself. It felt like something very natural that fit into the book and with the characters.
I see. And that actually leads beautifully into my next question. Talking about the Alchemist series in particular, the underlying theme, I think for many of your books, seems to be transformation. Writing fiction is certainly a process of transformation as well, because writers put symbols on the page and through these put ideas and images into the reader's head. What's been your most powerful writing inspiration or mentor that's contributed to your transformation as a writer?
I've been so fortunate to have so many wonderful mentors, both people in person who I know, and then also writers who I haven't known personally, but who've really inspired me and led me on this path. I think that the author who was the first biggest influence on me was Elizabeth Peters. Her novels are really what inspired me to want to become a mystery novelist. And second, right after that, is Aaron Elkins. His Gideon Oliver mysteries really
Oh,
inspired
yes.
me. Yes. And so I actually had the opportunity to meet him, and he has become a champion of my books and a mentor for me. I felt like I had made it as an author even before my first book came out, because Aaron Elkins, I reached out to him before I knew him, and just asked him if he'd be willing to read the first novel and give it a blurb if he enjoyed it. And he had actually seen that I had written a blog post about how much I loved his books. So when I contacted him without him knowing me, and asked if he'd be willing to read the book, he already knew that I was a true fan of his and what his books had meant to me. And so that's what I think let him, even though he doesn't read that many new authors' books now, to blurb, he gave my first book a chance because he knew I was a true fan. And he ended up loving it and has become a mentor for me. So that's been really wonderful.
Oh, that's wonderful and so generous of him to give back in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts, Gigi, about someday writing pure historical fiction? You have such a strong grasp on the settings and the details and sort of the background for a lot of the events in your books.
Well, thank you. I have such fun when I get to write historical details into the books, and two of my books do have parallel chapters that are set in the past. There's one of the books in the Jaya Jones Treasure Hunt mystery series, and one of the books in the Accidental Alchemist series does have the chapters that are actually set in the past. And I have had such fun with those that I am toying with the idea of fully exploring a historical novel. But so far, it's just those past chapters. And in the book that I'm finishing right now, the fourth Accidental Alchemist book, that is another book where I have several chapters set in the past.
Oh, great. Well, we'll look forward to that. And touching back on sort of your life history, where did the impetus come from to launch yourself into writing mysteries? And I know you spoke earlier about your life-changing diagnosis and going through chemotherapy. But before that, did you ever really think about wanting to write mysteries and being a mystery novelist?
Yeah, I think that there are actually three points that really stand out in the journey to me. The first is really just when I was a kid, because I'm an only child, and I did have the opportunity to travel with my parents on their research trips. And since I was just on my own as the only kid in lots of these places, I would spend lots of time on my own, both exploring and reading and writing. And so that's really where I started to make up the type of stories that I love to read, which were always adventurous mystery type of stories. But I always, in terms of, as I grew up, I always just thought of it as a hobby until I was fortunate to receive a Malice Domestic grant for my work in progress of my first novel. And so that is a grant for unpublished traditional mystery writers to foster the next generation of traditional mystery writers. And after I had finished a first draft of Artifact, I really loved what I had created. And so I sent it into that contest, not thinking I would win, but just I was so proud that I had finished something.
Right.
So I applied and won the grant. And that was what really told me that I should take my writing more seriously than a hobby. And I'm so glad I did. That's when I joined Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America and really got to know the mystery writing community and learned about how to finish writing a good book. And then it was the cancer diagnosis that made me take charge more fully. I had, at that time of my diagnosis, it was the month after my 36th birthday, and my agent had been pitching my first novel to publishing houses for about a year then. And we kept hearing that marketing didn't know what to do with it because was a treasure hunt mystery series, but not a thriller, and it had a cozy voice, but wasn't it cozy? And so she was really trying hard to sell it. But when I had my diagnosis and my agent hadn't been able to sell the book, I really felt like I needed to take charge of something in my life. And we both felt that the book was ready to be out in the world. And so I decided to self-publish that first novel. And I'm so lucky that I have a wonderful agent, and she stuck with me, even though I decided to self-publish the first book. And then that book that I put out in the world ended up leading to 2 3-book deals for the Treasure Hunt series and then for the Alchemist series. So it was really life-changing to be able to think about being in control of something and having that experience, being able to take charge of the book and putting it out myself. And I ended up having a big party to celebrate jointly finishing cancer treatments and having the book launch party at a bookstore.
Amazing, an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And since we're talking about originality as our theme, I think diversity ties right into that, especially when your fiction features a unique female protagonist. Can you tell us more about Jaya Jones, the heroine of your other series, and how she came to be?
So when I first started writing, I followed the advice to write what you know. And so I have one parent who is from India and one parent who is from the US. And I wanted to have a character who was similar to that in terms of life experience, as a starting point. But I actually gave Jaya the opposite parents. It's my dad who's from India, so I made Jaya have her mom, and I also made her a foot shorter than me, so that I wouldn't get us confused, but we could still have similar life experiences.
Right.
And it's my parents who are the academics, but I made Jaya a history professor herself. And it's really interesting because now there is so much more of a discussion of diversity in mystery fiction, which is wonderful. But when I started writing, so now I finished that that first book more than 10 years ago now, I wasn't consciously thinking about, oh, I need to write diversity into my fiction. It was just something, this is my life, these are the people around me in my life, and I love mysteries, and so I'm going to write the people who I see in my life into my stories. And I do the same thing in the Accidental Alchemist books, with the diverse cast of characters who are all around Zoe. Again, just because these are the people in my life, so I wanted to see them on the page as well.
Great. Makes perfect sense. And Gigi, I believe you're going to give our listeners an exclusive sneak peek as part of your reading selection with us today. What are we going to hear from you?
Yes. So I thought that I would share this morning. I am just working on finishing revisions on the fourth Accidental Alchemist novel, which will be out in January of 2019. And so I'm really excited about this book. And so I'm just putting the finishing touches on it, but nobody's going to see it for quite a while. So I thought that I would just share a sneak peek of the first page of the new book.
Oh, we'd love that. We're ready when you are.
Okay. The last rays of daylight were descending over the Willamette River when I looked into the eyes of a man who'd been buried over 500 years ago. I grasped the chain I wore around my neck, now bearing both my gold locket and the pewter carving of a phoenix that my friend Dorian had found and given me as a good luck charm. The commingling metals were cool against my skin. "Are you okay?" A young man with flecks of dried red and orange paint on his hands touched my elbow. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He wasn't wrong. Not exactly. "I'm all right," I said. He looked unconvinced as his gaze fell to my clenched fist, but he nodded politely and pulled open the glass door leading into the art gallery. The narrow space along the river was wedged in between warehouses. I hadn't noticed it on my last waterfront walk the day before, which wasn't surprising. The Portland art scene was thriving, with new spaces popping up all the time. But that didn't explain the painting visible through the glass front window. The man who'd shaken me to my core wasn't flesh and blood, but his presence shone as resolutely in pigments as it had in life. How had a 21st century artist painted such an accurate likeness of my mentor, Nicholas Flamel?
Ooh.
Oh, that's awesome. Now I want to know.
Yeah, so this book, I'm having a lot of fun because for folks who've read the first three books in the series, you'll have heard Zoe's stories about Nicholas Flamel, who was her mentor when she became an alchemist, but she hasn't seen him in all of these years. And so we have her memories of him. But now at the start of this book, she has information that suggests that he hasn't been dead, but that he might still be alive and imprisoned, and that this mysterious painting could hold the secrets to where he is imprisoned.
Wow, that is great. We'll talk about originality. That's a fantastic plot. Love it.
It's been a lot of fun to be working on this book, and I'm exploring. There's lots of art and painting things, and my mom is an artist, so she's been helping me with making sure that I get my art facts right.
That's great. Well, Gigi, this is Wendy Kendall, and I am the other half of the duo, and I write cozy mysteries. And I've got my own questions for you, but first of all, I have to start by thanking you for the delicious vegan chocolate mousse recipe that features avocado as its main ingredient. Now that, to me, is delectable originality.
Yes, I love that recipe.
I'm going to start out by quoting your book, Elusive Elixir. Quote, alchemy is a personal transformation. Its core principle is transforming the impure into the pure, be it lead into gold or a dying body into a thriving one. And that's the end of the quote. What is it about alchemy that grabbed your interest so fully to commit the time and effort to create a mystery series?
I love that question because it really gets at the heart of the Accidental Alchemist series. And the credit goes not to my conscious self, but really to my subconscious self. Because after my scary health diagnosis, I really, while I wrote the book, since I was going through chemotherapy, it really was that I was seeking the elixir of life. And so all of those ideas of alchemy were really swirling in my mind as I was writing during that time. And so chemotherapy is both poison and a healer, and food as something that I could do that was healing my body while I was putting these other toxins into my body. So I was writing without consciously thinking about the themes of the book. But then when I sat back and read it afterwards, I realized that I had woven that in without realizing it.
Your gargoyle character, Dorian Robear Houdin, I just love the full name. He fancies himself a modern day Poirot. In what ways are these characters similar and dissimilar, Dorian and Poirot? And can you share some of your thoughts on Agatha Christie's works and influence?
One of the reasons that Dorian is such fun to write is because he has such a huge ego. And he's such a cute little impish creature. And so that contrast to me, that he is able to have this big detective ego, much like Poirot, and he has his French accent too. So I see that image in my head as I'm writing Dorian. And I've always loved Agatha Christie's works. She was a master at puzzle plot mysteries. I'm a huge fan of golden age of detective fiction authors. And one of the main reasons for that is that I love fair play puzzle plots, where really the author lays out all of the clues that the reader needs to solve the mystery. And hopefully they're there disguised enough that I don't really want to figure it out, but I want to know that I have all of those clues. And then when the detective at the end reveals the solution, there's this aha moment that you can go back and see everything. And so golden age authors really influenced me so much in terms of being able to write puzzle plots. And even more than Agatha Christie, who I love, it was John Dixon Carr was the golden age author who really inspired me and influenced me, and especially in my short fiction beyond the books. So my novelette, The Library Ghost of Tanglewood Inn, that recently won the Agatha for Best Short Story, that's a locked room, impossible crime mystery. And so impossible crime stories are something that golden age of detective fiction authors did wonderfully, that there's a seemingly impossible crime, but that looks like it must have a supernatural explanation, but really there is a puzzle that can be solved logically. And I absolutely love that about golden age authors and their puzzles.
That sounds like a passion you and I both share, and a lot of other millions of readers. Just love that.
Mm-hmm.
In your Accidental Alchemist series, you so skillfully up the stakes for the characters in the story. Can you discuss the importance of continually upping the stakes in a mystery, and also some ways that you've found that make the reader feel that heightened intensity?
Oh, well, thank you. So my way of upping the stakes that I love to do, because both of my series they're not thrillers, but they're not quite cozies either. And so I live in this place where I feel like I have some flexibility in terms of what kind of stakes I'm creating. And what I love to do is to have two layers of the mystery that's unfolding in each book. So in the Accidental Alchemist series, each book has a main mystery that affects Zoe and Dorian that they're solving, that's completely resolved at the end of the book. But then there's an added underlying tension and underlying threat that carries the series across books. So for the first few books in the Alchemist series, there's the threat that Dorian is slowly turning back to stone. And this is why he sought out Zoe in the first place as an alchemist, that he wanted her help deciphering this ancient alchemy book that had brought him to stone, but has now something has changed in the book, and that he's now turning back to stone and is going to suffer not just a natural death, but be living and trapped in stone. And because I hope that readers would come to care about Dorian, that they would care very much about solving that mystery so that he won't be trapped in stone. So there's both the immediate threat of the mystery in the book that is affecting the two of them, but then also that underlying tension always, even as we're solving the mystery, that there's that tension that needs to be solved as well. And I don't want to reveal too much of a spoiler, but I'm now having very much fun coming up with an arc to go across books with the fourth book that I'm working on right now.
Great.
Oh, that is good. Yeah. Well, you already on the other books have me on the edge of my seat when I'm reading. So,
oh, thanks.
What part, if any, can a romantic interest or a romantic subplot play in a mystery?
I like writing mysteries that are like the ones that I love to read, and I love romantic subplots in things. And all of my favorite mysteries have a romantic subplot, and so I've done that in mine as well. So in the Accidental Alchemist series, Max Liu, who Zoe has fallen for, but the challenge there is that how can she reveal to him her true identity and have him not run away screaming. So they're getting there, and that's a lot of fun to play with.
Well, your character Zoe Faust, she lives for centuries, and so almost it creates an illusion of time traveling for the reader. What are the challenges writing about more than one significant time period in a single book?
The challenge is also the most fun thing, that I get to do so much research, both online and at libraries, and I use any excuse to travel that I can. So whenever I'm traveling anywhere, I always seek out local museums and archives. And so that research is just so much fun. But I have to stop myself from just spending all the time doing research and never actually sitting down to write the book. Because if I were to do all of the research that I could possibly do, I would never have finished a single novel, because there's so much fascinating history out there that it's just so much fun. So the challenge really is balancing how much I need to know to get things right. So that people aren't throwing the book across the room. I really want to get the history right, but not doing too much research that I'll never get writing, or that I will just bog down the adventures of the stories with just an information dump of historical research. So finding that balance is the challenge.
It sounds like it takes a little self-discipline there to do that.
It does. And so I actually have a program on my computer called Focus that will turn off the internet for me for a specific amount of time, because I don't trust myself to do this. Because you two both know that when you're thinking, oh, I just need to look something up, it'll just take 2 minutes. And then you get online, and then 2 hours have gone by. So I need that to save me from myself.
I just have to ask, what in your Accidental Alchemist series, what is the significance and the connection of the bee swarms around Dorian's book that you want the reader to feel? I mean, I really feel these insects, these bees, but I felt like I sort of missed the significance.
Well, the significance isn't any one thing, but really what I wanted to do was, in part of my research, looking at the old, the carvings that they would make of images that went in alchemy books. And so looking at all of these pictures and the different elements that are used in alchemy, and there are different bees and different animals and birds that are used in these different ways. And so it's all of these creatures. I really wanted to just get at the aura of mystery and something that engages all of the senses. And because bees make honey and there's so many scents that are changing and emanating from this book, I felt like bees really could have the reader get more engaged with all of their senses and have it be not just the sound of the bee or the watching it physically flying, but also the scents that would be evocative of that. So I just love that I felt that it engaged all the senses. So I hope that came across as well.
Nice. Yeah, that actually does come across for sure. Well, Zoe Faust shows compassion in both big and small ways. For example, in Elusive Elixir, after Professor Chevalier rushed from his room after being chased out by those bees, then I'm going to quote what Zoe was thinking. Zoe closed the office door and locked it. I knew I didn't have much time, so I'd make the most of it. First things first, I left a salve on the desk that would help with the bee stings. That's the end of my quote. But so even though her time was short, she had thoughtfully brought the salve with her and took the time to leave it for him. I just want to ask, how important is it showing compassion in your protagonist?
Well, when I read books, one of the things that I love is when there's characters who I want to spend time with. So I feel like when I select a book, it really is important to me that I do like the main characters, that these are not people who I'm repulsed by, but people who, even if they're flawed, they do have redeeming qualities, and they are people who I do want to be rooting for. And so I know that I really like that in terms of other books with characters who I would like to know. And so I really like to write characters who have flaws, but who I really do. It takes a long time to write a book. I like to enjoy the characters who I'm spending so much time with. And so I like Zoe and Max and Dorian and all of the characters. So, yeah.
I really like them too, definitely. And I recommend them to our listeners, that you're going to enjoy them as well. Julie, I think that you were going to talk to us a little bit more about originality.
I am. And I guess the question I'd start with was, can we truly be original in what seems more and more like a copycat world? I happened to read something in Smithsonian Magazine recently that was intriguing, actually disturbing, especially if you're a writer. In their April 2018 issue that's dedicated to artificial intelligence, AI, there's an article titled Hacking the Future by Stefan Talty. He talks about how someday soon AI will impact and help with every aspect of your life, even entertainment. That sounds good, right? Well, I'm going to quote a paragraph for you from his article. The AI remembers your favorite author, and at the mention of her last name, Austen, it connects you to a Chinese service that has spent a few hours reading everything Jane Austen ever wrote, and has now managed to mimic her style so well that it can produce new novels indistinguishable from the old ones. You read a fresh Austen work every month. then spend hours talking to your AI about your favorite characters and the AI's favorite characters as well. Well, for me as a writer, believing writers and artists will never be replaced by technology because we're original and use our human imaginations. Well, this thought about AI was kind of creepy. This relates directly to a conversation Wendy and I had recently with another writer friend in a bookstore, where I questioned the validity of a writer who's hired to take on the characters, plots, and series of a deceased author, such as the late great thriller writers Vince Flynn, one of my personal favorites, and Stieg Larsson. I felt these new works of fiction, which still bear their deceased author's name along with the new writers, were in some ways derivative and not original. That's purely my opinion. Our writer friend said, in a way, that this practice actually expands the reach of the original series and gives more readers access to more stories. That's one point of view. Wendy and I agreed, I think, that the original stories were just that, an original and unique creation, an artistic vision of a singular human being. And again, in my opinion, that's very hard to replace. So here's to the singular, quirky, fantastic, unconventional, and imaginative work that all fiction writers produce. I hope that we continue to be valued for our imaginations and encourage the same in our children and grandchildren. I'd like to end with this thought, actually from someone we know much better for his science. He said, "I am enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world." And that came from Albert Einstein. And now, Wendy, I think you're going to talk about something that came from Kurt Vonnegut, which is another one of my favorite writers.
I am. Thanks, Julie. I'm going to talk about the plots of all stories ever written. And it's inspired by Kurt Vonnegut's rejected university thesis. And he later did a lecture on it. If you Google it online on YouTube, you'll find it. And it's not long. It's maybe 10 minutes. And it's very interesting and entertaining to watch. What he talks about is that all classic stories share a basic shape. And there's really 7 plots to all stories that are ever written. You've got boy gets girl, or it could just be someone gets something, and then they lose it, and then they get it again. There's also rags to riches, which is a rise in happiness. There's riches to rags, which is a fall in happiness. There's somebody in a hole. So that's somebody who gets in trouble and then gets out of trouble again. And then the last 3 are called Icarus, which is a rise and a fall. And an example of that would be, for example, Romeo and Juliet. Cinderella or Gulliver's Travels would show you rise and then fall and then rise again. And then Oedipus is the last one, which is a fall, a rise, and then a fall again. And it's really interesting when you start thinking about all the books that you've read and putting them into these plot lines. Vonnegut even takes the story of Cinderella and the story in the Old Testament, the origin story, and shows the similarities of both of those, where they have the beginning steps, which draws similarities, and then that stroke of midnight, which is the creation, and then a rise to bliss at the end, which is also the expectation of redemption. So the more you think about, I know these are pretty generic shapes to stories, but still, the more you think about it, it's fascinating the millions of stories that there have been over time, that they can all be honed down into one of these 7 categories. So then, thinking about computers again, university of Vermont researchers were looking at feeding these 7 categories into computers and then having the computers knowing these categories, generating their own stories. So my view on this is that authors and readers bring their own imaginations and experiences to reading. So you can take these 7 categories, but the unique imaginations and experiences, that's what's going to give you the infinite variations of originality. The other thing that people do that bring to this, that computers are dependent on people for, is to see the trends to come. So right now, people are looking at new plot arcs that are possibly forming right now. The International Center for Publishing Studies at Oxford Brookes University is noting the increased reading on digital devices. But not just noting that, I mean, we all know that people are doing that more, but they're noting the changing behavior of authors that is causing. So now we're getting more plot-driven genre fiction and less character-driven literary fiction. What I think, though, is that whether it's computer-written or human-written, readers have the choice of what they read, and that's the most important thing, that there's no limitations on what is out there to be read. And then people can make their own choices. And if it's a really good story, that's the most important thing. So now I'm going to go straight into a book recommendation that I have. In addition to Gigi's books, my book recommendation is titled Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. It's written by Robin Sloan. And if you're looking for a fun and humorous read with a mystery to solve, this is it. This is a modern-day quest for the fountain of youth. It's the junction where Google crosses with ancient tomes, puzzles, codes, and fellowships, and just a dash of fantasy and science fiction thrown in. Clay Janin is a victim of an economic recession, losing his job as a web designer. He searches the Silicon Valley and San Francisco for work and stumbles into a night shift job at the 24-hour, tall, skinny bookstore that's right next door to a strip club. It doesn't take long before Clay becomes curious about the mystery surrounding the bookstore. Impressions begin to add up, including a man who's walking fast down a dark, lonely street. Clay hears quick steps and hard breathing, full of wonder and need. The tinkle of a bell above a door signals the need for the clerk. With a ladder, Clay climbs the 3 stories high bookshelves in the way back, and then the right book at exactly the right time. Well, one way Clay can try to solve the mystery is to painstakingly record clues and observations in daily logbooks and then tediously review and analyze his writings over time. Or another option is to seek the help of a lovely new friend, Kat Potent, who works at Google and can leverage Google company capabilities to do some high-tech analysis. But this quest becomes too big, even for Google alone. It will also require creative thinking and some good old-fashioned legwork with new friends and with old friends. Clay has a wonderful assortment of friends who all bring helpful talents to the quest. Neil is the 6th grade geek who is now a self-made millionaire. How did he make his millions? Oliver Groen has the day shift at the bookstore. Clay shares an apartment with Matt and Ashley, who are constructing the Mattropolis within their apartment. New friend Edgar Deckel guards the reading room that you'll want to explore. And the clues lead them into an exciting adventure and unforeseen opportunities. Here's a quote from part of the book. Neil takes a sharp breath, and I know exactly what it means. It means I've waited my whole life to walk through a secret passage built into a bookshelf, unquote. And at the center of this storm is store owner Mr. Penumbra, who's very interested to know, what do you seek in these shelves? What secrets is he hiding, and to what purpose? And when the unexpected happens, can Clay and his friends help him or expose him? Do solved puzzles, translated codes, and readings from ancient tombs lead to the fountain of youth that so many fervently seek? And what becomes of the secret fellowship? Find out what it is that truly provides a person with immortality. Okay, Gigi, now I'm wondering what you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Well, first of all, after that excellent review, I've had Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore on my to-be-read shelf for a while, but I think now it's going to move up in the hierarchy to get read. But so thinking about, based on our discussion today, I think that what I would love to recommend based on this topic of originality is not one book, but a small publisher who I've been really enjoying lately, who's putting out some amazing fiction. So Locked Room International is a small press that is currently translating lots of foreign language impossible crime, locked room mysteries. And so since this is a genre that I absolutely love, but it's been really, it was popular in the golden age, but only now that it's getting a resurgence in popularity, there have been lots of books that were written in the past several decades by foreign authors who haven't been translated into English, but now through Locked Room International, they have been. I've been reading lots of fantastic Japanese mystery novels that are impossible crime stories recently translated into English, and also French author Paul Halter is writing some tremendous mysteries. And also based on the discussion just a few minutes ago of how there's only a few types of stories that can be written, but even within the constraints of what we can tell, how to make a story original. And so in the impossible crime subgenre of mystery, it really amazes me how wonderfully creative authors can be, that there's only a certain number of ways that you could possibly have something that seems impossible, but that really happened. Like a certain, John Dixon Carr has a wonderful lecture where he actually lays out the number of ways that it can be. But authors, even within those constraints, have wonderfully creative ways that you can realize these solutions. And those mysteries are just so satisfying to me.
Oh, terrific. Well, I'm going to jump into my book review here, and since we've been talking today about mysteries and thrillers which stretch the boundaries of imagination in a very good way, I thought I'd recommend one by the esteemed David Morrell, who's not only the author of the original Rambo novel called First Blood, and is a gifted writing mentor to many writers and a writing instructor, but he'll also be our guest here in early June. And the book I'm recommending today is The Covenant of the Flame, which starts with a New York reporter, Tess Drake, who's drawn into the disappearance and horrific murder by fire of a charismatic, almost strangely angelic stranger. She teams up with a veteran New York City police officer, unaware of where the path of death and destruction will take them. And the counterpoint to this murder investigation is a secret cult of gray-eyed strangers, arcane rituals, and the brutal murders across the globe of those who defile and pollute the earth and the sea. This is a fast-paced, highly imaginative thriller that moves from Manhattan to Washington, D.C., to Spain, and into the prehistoric caverns of early man. There's not much I can say, actually, without spoiling it for you because of the way the plot's constructed. But if you like great action sequences, a little romance, environmental disaster, sacrificial murder, and political betrayal, this book has it all. The New York Daily News reviewer said, "Action, intrigue, and not one dull page." Exactly what you want in a thriller with a unique environmental spin, which I loved. In closing, our special thanks to mystery writer Gigi Pandian, a true original, for our interview today. Your fiction was a refreshing break for me, especially as I climb out of the research trenches of World War I, and I'm anxious to try out some of those vegan recipes found in each book. We're so glad you could join us. Keep reading and keep writing.
Thank you so much for having me. That was really fun.
Our pleasure.